It does not begin with missiles or sirens. It begins with tanks in city streets, not at a border, but in the heart of Iran, where protests once filled the squares. And while the world waits to see whether a U.S. strike will ignite the region, something darker is already unfolding inside the country itself. This is not one crisis. It is several colliding at once. A brutal internal crackdown, a growing missile arsenal, secret negotiations behind closed doors, and a divided Washington trying to decide its next move. Stay with me, because the pattern only makes sense when you see every piece. Videos from inside Iran show heavy military hardware deployed against civilians, not riot police, tanks, armored vehicles. The crackdown is reportedly overseen by Ali Larijani, now described as a central power broker in this moment of turmoil. What shocks observers is not only the force being used, but the language surrounding it. Larijani has openly referenced Tiananmen Square as a model for restoring order, stability at any cost. Meanwhile, President Trump has publicly claimed that up to 32,000 protesters may have been killed, shot, or executed. The number is disputed, but the fact that it was stated from a U.S. podium shows how explosive the narrative has become. And all of this unfolds as U.S. carrier groups reposition and destroyers patrol near Iranian waters. At the same time, Iran is advancing its missile capabilities. Israeli defense officials warn that Tehran is improving ballistic systems that could, in theory, carry unconventional payloads. There is no confirmed deployment of such warheads, but capability alone shifts strategy. Recent conflicts have already shown Iranian missiles penetrating defenses. Now imagine those delivery systems evolving further. Trump has also claimed Iran is working toward missiles that could one day reach the United States. Analysts say Tehran is not yet there, but missile programs grow in range and precision over time. Medium range becomes long range. Capability becomes leverage. And this is where the story deepens, because Iran is not developing in isolation. Just yesterday, reports surfaced of a Russian deal providing hundreds of man-portable air defense systems and thousands of associated missiles to Iran. Air defense that complicates any potential strike campaign. But now another negotiation is underway, this time with China. According to Reuters reporting, Iran is nearing a potential agreement to purchase Chinese-made CM-302 anti-ship missiles. These are not symbolic weapons. These are advanced anti-ship systems designed to threaten naval vessels. And what sits near Iran's coast right now? 2 U.S. carrier strike groups, dozens of destroyers, a substantial American naval presence positioned as both deterrent and preparation. The timing is not accidental. If China were to deliver such systems, it would mark one of the most advanced military hardware transfers Beijing has made to Tehran. It would also raise serious questions about compliance with long-standing UN arms restrictions. Now, here is the crucial nuance. That deal has not been finalized. Negotiations have reportedly stretched on for more than 2 years. There is no confirmed delivery date, but the talks intensified after last year's conflict. And if such a transfer were to occur in the middle of escalating U.S. tensions, it would dramatically alter the maritime balance in the Persian Gulf. Imagine U.S. commanders calculating risk not only from coastal batteries and fast attack boats, but from newly delivered high-performance anti-ship missiles sourced from a global power. The message would be unmistakable: Iran preparing for confrontation while publicly claiming to pursue diplomacy. And speaking of diplomacy, negotiations are scheduled to resume in Geneva. Iran's foreign minister has declared readiness to reach what he calls a fair and equitable deal. He has repeated that Iran will under no circumstances build a nuclear weapon. He has invoked religious decrees that supposedly prohibit nuclear arms development. But there is one problem that continues to undermine trust: uranium enrichment to 60%. Civil nuclear power requires enrichment levels around 5%. 60% moves dangerously close to weapons grade. Before the strikes conducted under Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran had stockpiled uranium enriched to that level. Even now, reports indicate Tehran is offering to relinquish only part of that stockpile while retaining the rest as negotiating leverage. So the question becomes unavoidable. If the program is purely peaceful, why enrich so high? Why retain that material at all? These are not abstract technical debates. They are the core of the trust deficit poisoning the talks. And then there is the missile program. Iran refuses to discuss it in negotiations. For Washington and Jerusalem, that refusal may be the deal breaker. Even if a nuclear framework is agreed upon, ballistic missiles remain untouched. That means delivery systems capable of carrying conventional or unconventional payloads continue to expand. Many analysts believe this is where diplomacy may collapse, not over centrifuges, over rockets. Inside Washington, the debate is intense. According to reports, General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has warned that airstrikes alone are unlikely to achieve regime change and could entangle the United States in a prolonged conflict. President Trump publicly dismissed such concerns, insisting that if conflict comes, it can be won, and emphasizing that he alone makes the final decision. So what is happening behind the scenes? Is the Pentagon signaling caution while the White House projects strength? Are internal disagreements being leaked to shape public opinion? Or is this coordinated messaging designed to keep Tehran guessing? Multiple interpretations exist, and Iran is watching every word. Iran's own deputy foreign minister has warned that once war begins, it cannot be neatly contained. A limited strike, he argues, would not remain limited. The entire region would suffer. That is classic asymmetric strategy. Iran cannot defeat the United States in conventional open battle, but it can complicate, stretch, and regionalize conflict. It can activate proxies. It can target shipping lanes. It can pressure U.S. bases across multiple theaters. Prolonged unpredictability is its leverage. Meanwhile, analysts and even social media users track unusual indicators, from air traffic patterns to something as absurd sounding as pizza orders near the Pentagon, attempting to predict strikes before they happen. Defense officials joke about ordering extra pizza to confuse observers, but behind the humor lies a real recognition. In the age of open source intelligence, movements are monitored constantly. Both sides understand the surveillance environment. Both sides understand perception management. So here we stand. Tanks in Tehran, missile negotiations with Beijing, air defense deals with Moscow, U.S. carriers positioned within range, uranium enriched to levels that raise alarm, Geneva talks about to resume, and internal debate in Washington over whether airstrikes would deter, destabilize, or deepen the crisis. If you want continued coverage that cuts through rhetoric and examines the strategic chessboard as it shifts, now is the moment to subscribe and hit like so this analysis reaches more people and you do not miss what happens next. Because the next phase may not begin with an explosion. It may begin with a statement, or a delivery, or a breakdown in talks, or a strike announced at midnight. Every piece on this board is moving simultaneously. And the most dangerous moments in history are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the quietest. But here is where the story becomes even more volatile, because what we are watching is not just a standoff between governments. It is a collision between timelines. Iran's leadership is operating on one timeline, Washington on another, Israel on a third, and China and Russia on their own strategic clocks. And when timelines misalign, crises accelerate. Inside Iran, the crackdown is not only about suppressing protests, it is about buying time. Time to stabilize the regime internally, time to secure missile production sites, time to harden nuclear infrastructure deeper underground, time to disperse key assets so that if strikes come, the damage can be absorbed. Satellite imagery over recent months has shown construction activity near known nuclear facilities, reinforced entrances, expanded tunnel networks, and increased movement at sites long associated with enrichment and research. These are not the actions of a country confident that diplomacy alone will protect it. These are the actions of a country preparing for the possibility that talks collapse overnight. And if talks collapse, what comes next is not theoretical planning, it is operational sequencing. Consider the geography. Iran's missile arsenal is spread across hardened silos, mobile launchers, and underground complexes built into mountains. The terrain itself is a defensive asset. A strike campaign would not be a single wave and done. It would require sustained sorties, suppression of air defenses, and careful targeting to avoid regional escalation. And every additional day of strikes increases the risk that proxies across the region activate. Hezbollah in Lebanon with its vast rocket inventory. Militias in Iraq capable of targeting U.S. installations. Houthi forces in Yemen already demonstrating anti-ship capabilities in key maritime corridors. The Strait of Hormuz remains the narrow artery through which a significant percentage of global oil flows. Even limited disruption there would ripple through energy markets instantly. Insurance premiums spike, tankers reroute, oil futures jump, and global economies already strained by inflation feel the shock. Now ask yourself this: is Iran's missile expansion purely defensive, or is it designed as bargaining power? Because the line between deterrence and coercion is thin. When Iran enriches uranium to 60%, retains stockpiles, expands missile range, and simultaneously negotiates, it creates ambiguity. Ambiguity is leverage. It keeps adversaries guessing. It forces Washington and Jerusalem to calculate worst-case scenarios. But ambiguity cuts both ways. It also fuels mistrust. And mistrust is what makes diplomacy fragile. If one side believes the other is negotiating in bad faith while advancing capabilities behind the scenes, the appetite for compromise evaporates. Inside Washington, political calculations are intensifying. An air campaign may appear decisive, but history shows that regime change from the air alone is rare. Infrastructure can be damaged. Facilities can be destroyed. But political systems do not collapse neatly from precision strikes. And yet doing nothing carries its own risks. If Iran crosses certain thresholds in enrichment or missile deployment, critics will argue that inaction enabled escalation. The White House must weigh not only military feasibility, but political optics, alliance cohesion, and domestic opinion. The memory of prolonged Middle Eastern conflicts still shapes public sentiment. There is no serious appetite for ground forces. Even the most hawkish voices limit their proposals to air and naval action. But air campaigns are not sterile. They invite response. And Iran has made it clear that response would not be confined to a single battlefield. Meanwhile, Israel's calculus is sharper and more immediate. For Jerusalem, missile capability paired with potential unconventional payloads is not an abstract debate. It is existential. Israel has demonstrated in the past a willingness to conduct preemptive strikes when it believes thresholds are being crossed. That possibility introduces another layer of unpredictability. A unilateral Israeli action could trigger broader escalation regardless of Washington's preference. And Tehran knows this, which is why the missile program is guarded so fiercely in negotiations. To concede missiles would be to concede deterrence. And then there is China. Beijing's role is often framed narrowly around arms transfers, but the relationship is broader. Energy agreements, infrastructure investments, financial cooperation outside Western banking systems. If anti-ship missiles are delivered, it signals not only military support, but geopolitical positioning. China benefits from U.S. distraction. It benefits from Washington allocating resources to another prolonged regional crisis. But China also relies on stable energy flows from the Gulf. It walks a careful line: support without overexposure, influence without entanglement. Russia, too, sees advantage in a United States absorbed elsewhere. The reported air defense transfers complicate strike planning. The more layered Iran's defenses become, the more costly any campaign appears. Now step back and examine the psychological dimension. Iran's leadership projects defiance publicly. It frames enrichment as sovereign right. It frames missile development as defensive necessity. It frames internal protests as foreign-instigated unrest. But prolonged crackdowns carry risk. Economic pressure, sanctions, internal dissent, elite fractures. Regime stability is never absolute. And that is why external escalation can sometimes serve as distraction. Rally the population around external threat. Shift narrative from domestic grievances to national defense. But that strategy only works if the external threat is credible yet contained. If conflict spirals beyond control, it can destabilize rather than unify. So what are the possible scenarios? 1. Negotiations produce a limited agreement focused narrowly on enrichment caps while sidestepping missiles. That buys time but leaves core tensions unresolved. 2. Talks collapse over missile refusal, and targeted strikes follow, aimed at specific facilities. Iran retaliates asymmetrically through proxies and maritime pressure, but both sides attempt to prevent full regional war. 3. A miscalculation occurs, perhaps an Israeli strike or an attack on U.S. naval assets, triggering broader escalation that pulls multiple actors into direct confrontation. 4. Internal instability inside Iran reshapes leadership dynamics before external war materializes. Each scenario carries different timelines, different risks, and different global consequences. Financial markets are already watching closely. Energy traders monitor tanker movements. Defense contractors see stock fluctuations tied to headlines. Regional states quietly adjust defense postures. Gulf countries increase alert levels while avoiding overt alignment that could make them targets. Europe worries about missile reach and refugee flows should conflict expand. And all of this unfolds while diplomatic language continues in Geneva, where phrases like fair deal and equitable framework are spoken even as centrifuges spin and missiles are tested. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes wars do not begin because one side desires them. They begin because both sides believe the other side will blink. Iran may calculate that Washington prefers a deal at almost any cost. Washington may calculate that Tehran will ultimately compromise to avoid overwhelming force. Israel may calculate that waiting increases danger. China and Russia may calculate that limited support yields strategic advantage without consequence. When multiple actors calculate simultaneously, misjudgment becomes more likely. We are in a moment where rhetoric, capability, and perception are colliding. Tanks in the streets signal internal fear. Missile negotiations signal preparation. Diplomatic overtures signal strategic patience. Naval deployments signal deterrence. And each signal is interpreted differently by different capitals. The world has seen such patterns before. Sometimes they diffuse quietly, sometimes they ignite unexpectedly. If you have followed this far, you understand that this is not a simple narrative of good versus bad or attack versus defense. It is a layered strategic puzzle unfolding in real time. And the next development could emerge from any direction. A satellite image, a leaked memo, a surprise delivery, a failed test, a sudden strike, or a breakthrough announcement that temporarily lowers the temperature. The only certainty is uncertainty. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand not just what happens, but why it happens, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share your perspective in the comments. Do you believe diplomacy can survive the missile impasse? Do you think a limited strike would remain limited? Or are we watching the slow motion build up to a confrontation that none of the players truly control anymore? The answer to that question may define not just the region, but the global balance of power in the years ahead.